creatives, I'm your host, Aylin Wild, and this is my podcast, Empathy Machine. Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time, welcome. In this podcast, I discuss films, give you videography tips and tricks, and unpack other creative topics. In today's episode, I'll be discussing how to stop doubting yourself and gain confidence in creating. The creative world can be so daunting and sometimes quite overwhelming and intimidating to get into. It can be so tempting to compare yourself to others and become discouraged and feel defeated because you don't quite measure up. But what if the problem isn't really your level of creative talent and natural ability, but your mindset? What if the problem is that instead of pressing on ahead and pushing past those barriers, you give up because you believe it's a waste of time to even try? Well, allow me to let you in on a little secret. Almost everyone has those doubts. Very, very few people are born with natural creative talent that doesn't need a significant amount of refining through a process of time and determination. But sometimes it's really hard to push through those doubts. So today I'm going to be taking you through some practical strategies to help you gain confidence in creating. Lack of confidence and self-doubt is definitely an issue I've struggled with many times over the past few years and continue to struggle with today. I think all creatives have this problem really, and I think that's because of the nature of the industry itself. The creative industry is incredibly subjective, so there aren't really that many rules or guidelines to work with that let you know whether you're succeeding or not. In most other industries, there are guidelines and standards, and most of the time, there are measurable levels of success. For example, in the medical industry, a doctor who has completed a medical degree will be given a title and letters after their name. They then have the option of doing another several years of training in surgical specialties and can acquire a specific qualification. They can then obtain a special certificate to become a consultant and so on. So if you're in the medical industry, you know exactly where you stand. You know exactly who you are and what your purpose is, and you know exactly what you're qualified to do. And most other industries have varying degrees of this as well. But in the creative industry, most of the time, there isn't really one guideline or measure of success that will tell you that you're actually good at what you do. I think in the film industry, this is less of an issue because there are definitely structures and guidelines and specific titles. But in videography or photography or physical art like painting, it can be extremely difficult to know who you are and where you stand in the creative world. And if you're in that boat today and you feel like you're not good enough or you're thinking of giving up, I just want to encourage you with a few little tips and ideas that you might not have considered before you give up, okay? Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is doubt. Doubt is very common for an artist or a creative because, like I said, it's difficult to know where you stand in the creative world because there's no real concrete measure of success. Doubt is what gives rise to imposter syndrome, which is defined as the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. According to verywellmind.com, imposter syndrome characteristics are self-doubt, an inability to realistically assess your competence and skills, fear that you won't live up to expectations, attributing your success to external factors, sabotaging your own success, berating your performance, overachieving, and setting very challenging goals and feeling disappointed when you fall short. I've definitely suffered with imposter syndrome a lot, and really I still have it quite frequently. Every time someone compliments my work, I get kind of quite confused. I always think that either they're just being nice and complimenting me to be kind, or that they have really bad taste and they can't appreciate what's actually good. And that's the voice in my head every time I receive a compliment for anything I've created. I just can't quite get my head around the idea that maybe I'm not as bad as I think I am. And maybe if all of these people are complimenting me and asking me to do work for them, maybe it's actually me who can't see my work properly. And I think it's good to remember that there is a difference between doubt and humility. According to the dictionary, doubt is a feeling of uncertainty or lack of conviction, and humility is the quality of having a modest or low view of one's importance. So really, the characteristic of doubt is the emotion attached to it, which is fear. And I think fear is an incredibly powerful emotion, and it can be very helpful to us in some cases. But I think we have a huge excess of fear in our society in general. I think fear is useful in small doses and allows us to make wise decisions. And I'm grateful for the fear I feel in certain situations. But misplaced fear is extremely dangerous and detrimental to your health. Prolonged fear and anxiety can cause panic attacks, headaches, depression, increased risk of high blood pressure and heart disease, stomach aches, diarrhea, digestive issues, a weakened immune system, increased risk of pulmonary disease, muscle tension, and insomnia. So, choose to be humble, not fearful. Practically, that means paying attention to that negative voice in your head and choosing to override it with something encouraging. So, for example, that voice might say something similar to mine. It might say, that thing you made was terrible and everyone knows it. And the only reason they're saying nice things to you is because they feel sorry for you or because they're just trying to make you feel good. And instead of accepting that voice and listening to it and letting it affect you with those feelings of fear, replace it with humility. So you could choose to think, you know what, I think that piece wasn't the greatest thing ever made. It wasn't earth-shattering or life-changing, but it brought a smile to someone's face, or it touched someone, or it made someone think, or it helped me to grow. And that's enough, and that's worth what I put into it. And then you let it go and you move on to something else. The second thing you can do, which will really help with this, is to ask yourself why you're creating and never forget your answer. And a little tip with this, be outward focused in your purpose. I know it's a cliche, but it really is more blessed to give than to receive. It just does something to your soul that lets you breathe, because worrying about yourself and trying to make yourself happy is frankly exhausting and such a waste of energy. So be outward focused in your purpose. And don't just think about it once in your head and then forget about it. Physically write it down. Why are you creating? Who are you serving? What value can you bring to other people? This is your purpose statement and something you can go back to every time you have that voice of doubt. Every time you experience imposter syndrome, you go back to that purpose statement and you remember why you're doing this. Because that will give you the drive and the determination to do it anyway, even if in your mind you're not succeeding yet. Now, within your purpose statement, it's important to consider your advantages and your strengths. Because if you really aren't any good at something at all and you can't see any way of getting to where you want to be, then maybe you have picked the wrong path to pursue. And this could just mean that you have to pivot your specific chosen field. You don't have to change your purpose statement, but you may have to adjust how you're going to achieve it. So, for example, if you really want to be a fashion stylist, but your talent is in drawing, for example, and maybe you also have access to a family friend who's a fashion designer and does fashion illustrations, then maybe you could consider pivoting your chosen field to be a fashion designer instead. And your purpose statement might be to make women feel beautiful in their body. You don't have to change your purpose statement just because you're not going to actually be styling them anymore, because you can still achieve that through design, but you have to work with your strengths and advantages in order to have the biggest impact. So if you were to continue down that path and become a stylist, you could still be successful and have an impact in women's lives, but you could have so much more impact if you were to use what you have naturally in order to achieve the same goal. And that will really help your confidence as well. So again, what are your strengths? So what are you actually good at or have natural talent and ability in? And what are your advantages? So what do you have access to already that will be a natural advantage to you in order to achieve your purpose statement? Tip number 3 is to remember that you are no different than anyone else, but also that you are unique. Now that might sound contradictory, but let me explain. So one of the most common things in my diary over the past few years when I did write in it was to say that I was completely different to everyone else. I would always write things like, I feel like everyone else got given a guide to life and my copy got lost in the mail. And sometimes it does feel like everyone else has some kind of special skill that you don't have. But the truth is that everyone is creative in their own way. Very, very few people are born with some crazy natural ability that you don't have. The truth is, you don't see the work and the time and the effort that goes into what that person naturally created. You only have access to the live show, not the behind the scenes. So every time you feel yourself despairing and thinking you can't do it, and everyone else is so much better than you, just remember to be kind to yourself, treat yourself the way you would treat someone else. And rather than comparing yourself with other people who have completely different sets of strengths and advantages, compare yourself with yourself. Are you better than you were this time last year? If the answer is yes, then congratulations, you're succeeding. And in another year's time, you'll probably look at yourself now and see another improvement. And if you stretch that over 10 years, imagine where you'll be then. As long as you're constantly improving, you don't need to worry about what everyone else is doing. Some people are freaks and they practice something for a month and they're a wizard at it. And the problem is, those are the stories we hear because they're not the norm. We hear them because they're not the usual sequence of events. But chances are you're not going to be a master of something after 1 month. And I am literally preaching to myself right now, by the way, just so you know. Learn to compare yourself with yourself, be kind to yourself, and give yourself permission to take as long as you need to improve. It's okay, you have time. You don't have to be a master of something straight away. But if you keep giving up every time you aren't, you'll never be a master of anything. So set some realistic expectations of yourself. Where do you realistically want to be in 1 year? And keep in mind the 10,000 hour theory. If you don't know what that is, the 10,000 hour theory is a reference to a study in 1993 by Anders Ericsson, who observed violin students from childhood to adulthood to see whether hours of practice alone could determine someone's ability to master a skill, or whether it was down to purely natural talent. And basically, he found that on average, the best violinists in his study were those that practiced for an average of 10,000 hours, as opposed to those who had only done 4,000, regardless of natural talent. Now, since this study, there have been many people who have criticized it. Some people believe talent has a lot more to do with it than Ericsson did. But let's just assume for a moment that practice does at least help. So how are you going to practice your creativity? Think of it like a muscle. If you spend half an hour every day doing a workout, why not spend half an hour or an hour every day working out your creative muscle? You could watch a video, read a book, listen to a podcast, bake a cake, write an article, draw something, photograph something, whatever it is, do something every day to build your creative muscle and get in your 10,000 hours of creative practice. Remember, you are no different to anyone else. Everyone has creative abilities within them. You just have to be patient and kind to yourself and invest the time to practice your creative skill and master it. Having said that, though, you are different to everyone else because we all have a unique voice to bring to the table. No one in the history of the world has experienced the things you have experienced. No one else in the world has your exact genetic makeup, grew up in your home with your teachers and your imaginary friends. You are unique, and you have a responsibility to give the world what only you can give. And whether or not you think you're any good or whether you like your work or not is really not that important. What value is it bringing other people? What message is it sending to someone who was on the verge of giving up, who needed to hear exactly what you had to say? And the thing is, you may never know the blessing you've been to someone. You may never have any idea what impact something you created had on someone on the other side of the world. They may never reach out to you. They may never tell you. They may not even realize what an impact it had themselves. But because of you, their life is different. That is a responsibility that all of us have. So don't let fear stop you from stepping up to that responsibility. No matter how trivial or terrible you think your work might be, ask the right questions. Not, is this thing I've created good? but how much value will this bring to someone? Tip number 4 is to give yourself permission to fail. Failure is a gift. Failure is a wise teacher that is there to show you where to go next. It's so important not to misunderstand what failure is. Failure is only a bad thing if you don't learn from it. If you see every experience as a learning opportunity, you will start to succeed far more than you fail. So whenever you complete a project, ask yourself, how did I succeed in this project? How did I fail in this project? And then what can I learn from my success? And what can I learn from my failures? Learning from your successes means seeing what went right, making a note of it, and making sure to do more of that next time. And learning from failures means seeing something that went wrong, making a note of that, and making sure to do less of it or to somehow minimize it next time. And doing this gives you a completely different view of failure because now you start to see it as a teacher. You start to detach emotionally from your work and see instead what works and what doesn't work. And a great example of this process would be science. Science operates under the hypothesis principle, which basically means that the assumption is that you're wrong. As a scientist, you are working to disprove your theory, so you devise tests and experiments to rule out all of the possible ways you could be wrong. So right now, there are scientists working on this coronavirus vaccine, and the way they do it is to test out all kinds of different things until something sticks. So essentially, they're failing every day, but they don't see that as necessarily a negative thing because now they know what doesn't work. They now know all of the ways that won't produce the results they're looking for, and that's a good thing because now they can narrow it down until they do find what works. So learn to be grateful for failure because of the valuable information it gives you. Welcome failure into your creative world as a tool to refine your process, help you to improve, and keep you humble, which is extremely important. If you never fail at anything, you will quickly become insufferably proud and people will hate you. So just be grateful you won't have to deal with that because you have your trusty friend failure to look out for you and keep you focused on what's really important. Now, obviously, the goal isn't actually to fail constantly and never to succeed at anything. The goal is to succeed, but the only way to get there is through the path of failure. But success isn't a tangible final result. Success is a constant. Every time you improve or you bless someone or you grow in your abilities, that is success. So learn to celebrate the small wins as well as the big ones. Because the human brain has a tendency to focus on the negatives and forget the positives. So if someone leaves you a nice comment on something you've created, take a screenshot and save it in a photo album called Positive Feedback. And remember, every outcome is a learning opportunity. So use both your success and your failure to your advantage by taking something away from it. Tip number 5 is to picture a tree. One of the most memorable university lectures I ever attended was a psychology lecture about the brain and how it handles new information. And my lecturer was describing how most people view the brain as a room with boxes in it. And every time you experience something or you learn something and your brain stores the memory, you're putting a new box in that room. But she basically said that it's not really like that at all. She said the brain is more like a tree than a room with boxes. And every time you learn something, a branch is added to that tree. And every new branch means even more branches can sprout from that branch. So essentially, the more you know, the more you can know. So, you know those people who are impossibly smart or those people with insane memories? The reason they're so capable of retaining information is that there are a lot more connection points in their brain for new information to be added to. But how does this relate to creativity? Okay, so a lot of people complain that they're just not very creative. They can't come up with any new ideas because they've already used up all of their brain space and they don't have room for any more. Basically, they have writer's block. But the problem isn't actually that you can't come up with any more ideas. It's that you can't come up with ideas without coming up with ideas. Now, that might sound ridiculous, but just humor me. You might think you have no ideas, but in fact, you do have ideas, but you don't think any of them are any good. Just write them down. Write them all down. Every stupid, ridiculous, half-formed idea you have, write it down. Because as you start writing down all your stupid ideas, you are making new connections in your brain for more ideas to come. And maybe some of those ideas might not be so terrible. And then maybe you'll come up with a really great idea, and then an even better idea, and then a completely fantastic idea. But the fantastic idea probably won't come out of the blue. It will most likely come out of the branch of a not so great idea. So draw yourself a tree and stick it on your wall or somewhere you're going to see it often. And every time you feel like you can't come up with anything new, imagine adding new branches to that tree. Tip number 6 is that it's okay to follow the rules. Now, I have no idea where it comes from, but somehow creative people have it in their head that everything they do must be completely different. It has to be one of a kind, it has to be outside the box. But just think for a second about the motivation behind this. Why exactly does everything you do have to be completely different to everyone else? Most likely, the answer will be linked to some form of pride. You want to stand out and be better than everyone else, but if your purpose statement is to bless people and to add value to their lives, why exactly do you have to do something completely out of this world, bizarre and different in order to achieve that? Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't create things that are different, but you also shouldn't feel the need to only create things that are different. If you're stressing yourself out, racking your brains to find a different way to do something, stop. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to make something meaningful. And also remember, no one else on this planet is exactly like you anyway, so just the fact that you're making it will make it slightly different to everyone else's anyway. But don't pull your hair out because it looks similar to everyone else's either. That's okay. In fact, if you make something familiar to people, it's even more likely to bless them because they don't have to get past the barrier of unfamiliarity. They know exactly what they're going to get from you and they feel comfortable and safe in that space. You can even write yourself a cheat sheet. And this can come from your success and failure lessons. What have you learned from your previous projects? Write this down for yourself in a cheat sheet that you can refer to when you feel stuck and take the stress off yourself from trying to make something completely unique and different every time. If it works, it works. Why change it unless you know you've got something that's really going to add value to people? Changing something for the sake of making it unique is most likely a waste of your time. And sometimes it's fun to challenge yourself and find new ways of doing things, and that's great. But if you're stressing yourself silly, trying to make your stuff different just for the sake of it, stop. Write yourself a cheat sheet and stick to your own rules. You don't have to think outside the box in order to be creative. Tip number 7 is to stop obsessing over the existence of competition. Competition exists, and that's actually a good thing. If you had no competition whatsoever in your chosen field, that might actually be a sign that no one really wants what you're offering. There is nothing new under the sun, and if you have zero competition, chances are someone has already tried what you're doing and has failed because no one actually wants what they're offering. Now, this might not always be the case, of course, and there are many examples of people offering something completely new and different, which has become widely popular. But competition is always a good sign that there is already an established market for what you're offering the world. Every town has a restaurant. Every town has a hairdresser. Every town has a supermarket. Now, imagine if someone wanted to open a hairdresser, but they said to you, I'd love to open a hairdressing salon, but there are loads of hairdressing salons in the world, so I'm not going to. Now, that would be ridiculous, right? Because firstly, most people don't go to one hairdresser for their entire lives and never try out any others. And secondly, there's no capacity limit for the amount of hairdressers that can exist in the world before no more can be opened up. If you have something valuable to offer people, they will buy something from you. The presence of competition shouldn't be a deterrent for you to enter a particular field. It just means you're going to have to work a little harder and make sure that you are offering something valuable that will bless people. But competition is a good sign of a healthy demand for the service that you're offering society. Finally, tip number 8 is to make an encouragement board. If your brain is forced to think about 10 encouraging things a day, eventually it's going to sink in and you'll start to live it. Buy yourself a cheap corkboard, throw it up on your wall, and start pinning. Now, the most important thing to have on your board is your purpose statement. That should be right in the middle. It should be big and in bold. Next, you've got your list of advantages and strengths to remind yourself what you have and what to focus on. You can put your tree up there to remind yourself that your creativity is boundless. You can put your cheat sheet up there along with the things you're learning from your successes and failures. You can have a progress section of your board where you measure how much you've improved since you started. And you might have a countdown on there as well of how many hours you've spent mastering your skill so you can see how far you've got to go before you get to 10,000. You could have your realistic goals as well as your crazy dream goals because it's important to aim high so you give yourself permission to achieve crazy success. And the last thing you should have on there is words of encouragement. So this might be some encouraging Bible verses if you're a person of faith, or just some encouraging quotes. So for example, some Bible verses might be Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, or Deuteronomy 31:6, be strong and courageous, do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you, he will not leave you or forsake you. Or Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Some other encouraging quotes, to practice any art, no matter how well or badly, is a way to make your soul grow, so do it. Or if you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, then by all means paint and that voice will be silenced. Or draw the art you want to see, start the business you want to run, play the music you want to hear, write the books you want to read, build the products you want to use, do the work you want to see done. And there are so many encouraging quotes out there that you can find online, or if you hear something that moves you, that encourages you, write it down and stick it on there. Another one I heard the other day was, don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 10, which really helped me. But it's important to actually have these physically printed off and on your wall, or somewhere that you're going to see them every day. Because the point is to condition your brain subconsciously to think in a way that's actually productive rather than self-sabotaging, which is generally how most creatives think for some reason. And it might not seem like it would help you at all because maybe you don't believe those things. But if you see those words every day, they will eventually have an effect on the way you think. And if you don't believe me, there are so many studies that have been done on the power of your surroundings. A really great book which completely blew my mind is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which talks about that as well. So if you're skeptical, give that a read. All right, and that brings me to the end of my tips. But just quickly to recap, tip number 1, replace doubt with humility. Don't allow fear to rule your thought life, but speak humble encouragement over yourself instead of accepting the negative voice in your head. Tip number 2, create your outward focus purpose statement and define your strengths and advantages. Consider pivoting your direction to suit your strengths and advantages while always staying true to your purpose statement. Tip number 3, remember that you are no different than everyone else. Be kind and patient with yourself and set realistic expectations of where you want to be. Keeping in mind the 10,000 hour theory and doing a creative workout every day to strengthen your creative muscle. Also remember that you are unique and have a unique voice and therefore a responsibility to bring your unique gift to the world. Ask the right questions, not whether something is good or bad, but whether it will bring value to someone or not. Tip number 4, give yourself permission to fail. Remember that failure is a gift and a wise teacher. Learn from both your successes and your failures. Celebrate the small wins as well as the big ones. Tip number 5, draw yourself a tree. Remember that creativity builds creativity and you can never run out of ideas. Tip number 6, it's okay to follow the rules. Make yourself a cheat sheet and don't try to reinvent the wheel every time just for the sake of it. Tip number 7, stop obsessing over competition. Remember that competition is a sign of demand and should be an encouragement to you, not a deterrent. And finally, tip number 8, make an encouragement board. Print out your purpose statement, your strengths and advantages, your creativity tree, your cheat sheet, your 10,000-hour countdown, your realistic and dream goals, and lots of words of encouragement. My 10 film picks for this week come from Netflix UK, and the category is films to watch with your family. In alphabetical order, the films are Eddie the Eagle, Groundhog Day, How to Train Your Dragon, Howl's Moving Castle, Klaus, Mowgli, Spirited Away, The Little Prince, The Willoughbys, and Unicorn Store. Head on over to aylinwildmedia.com/filmlists and let me know which of these is your favorite and which family film that's not on there that you think people should check out as well. Okay, that's it for today's episode on confidence in creating. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If this episode inspired you at all, please don't forget to leave me a review. That would be really helpful. And I'd love to hear your feedback and any requests you might have for future episodes. Also, check out the show notes for this episode at aylinwildmedia.com/podcasts. I hope you have a great week and tune in next time for more creative insight into my experiences in the world of video and film.